Well, hi, everybody. I'm Todd Nash, president of the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, here today with Rocky Dallum, our contract lobbyist. And Rocky, we made it through another long session, and I wanted to talk about a little bit of our accomplishments and some of the things that we fell short on. But Rocky, do you want to introduce yourself one more time to those who may not know you?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Rocky Dallum. I am an attorney at Tonkintorp in Portland, but have been the lobbyist for the Cattlemen's Association, I think now since the beginning of 2016. So we've been through a number of sessions. They're all different, but this one certainly, this one probably takes the cake for the most interesting twists and turns from January till the end of June.
Yeah, certainly. So Rocky, I have a few things kind of laid out here. We started out session and everybody seemed kind of happy and cheery, and we had Senate Bill 66, Senate Bill 471, and Senate Bill 479, and we got pretty good traction on those very first ones. And for those that don't know, 466 had to do with the kill permit, and so if you got an elk, you could, or a deer that was a nuisance animal, you could take that home for your own consumption or give it to a neighbor. And we didn't get that bill through that committee, but we got an offer from ODF&W to say yes, that we'll work on that, and hopefully that comes to fruition where we'll get that straightened out. And I'm going to give you time to speak. I'll promise you, Rocky, but I'm going to run through another one here. 471, and that had to do with wolf compensation. Didn't change the program. It was just funding. It would give us $800,000 into that fund to continue on. And that made it out of committee right off the bat. And then the meat donation in 479. And so we had to where we could contribute wild game to food banks and other charitable organizations, not for resale, but we couldn't do that with custom exempt facilities and beef, and so we got that changed. That was one of the first bills that we saw go all the way through both committees, both floors, and onto the governors, and so anyway, that was exciting to get an easy bill, but a layup, and then we were on to wolf compensation that changed the policy a little bit. And this is where I'm going to let you start chiming in on any of the above. But 2631, we wanted to change wolf compensation and the way that we were being funded. And so let's talk about that. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And it feels like ages ago that we had testimony on those first three bills, I think the first week of session. And 471, as is often the case, bills come out in different forms at the end, but we did get the additional $1 million to the wolf compensation program in one of the final budget bills, which I think was a testament to member engagement. And even we've got a lot of new legislators, the educating of legislators consistently over the interim about the challenges with managing with wolves. And part of that was introducing a new concept for the first time, which I think got more discussion than I thought, which was this multiplier, which I think mirrors what Wyoming, at least, and other states do, is to figure out a better way for producers to be compensated for missing claims and knowing what the true cost of coexistence is. Two bills, 2631 and 2633. One was a 7 times multiplier, which didn't necessarily account in the language for working dogs and bulls and things that maybe don't need a multiplier. But then 2633, which was an Enviro counter, which was a 2 times multiplier, which probably undercuts the true costs by quite a bit. Both bills had a fair amount of conversation and were sent to the Ways and Means Committee. And I think, two factors as we moved through session. I think we did get some good steam. We had some great conversations, and some legislators who aren't typically or haven't yet been advocates for livestock, understanding the value of the multiplier. But ultimately, with the walkout creating some uncertainty, and then I think just the nature of some of the politics, having to figure out how you can get bills that have enough votes with all Republicans and then some Democrats. So A little disappointed that we couldn't get that multiplier over. I think there was some probably more backroom negotiating than we typically see in hearings. But I think OCA has always been cognizant of not going for a win to say they get a win, but really, try and get a policy that actually helps producers. So hopefully we've had some socialization to get that moving forward, and at least pick up the momentum, whether it's in 2024, 2025. But I'll say we got some good effort from our legislative champions, and probably really did some good education with some legislators who hadn't really thought about this. And the news headlines is, well, we say headlines, but folks recognizing that the wolf population is spreading across the state, I think is helping us get some attention and some ears from folks that we typically wouldn't get as much traction with. So more work to be done. At the same time, really good work by OCA and members and OCA leadership to be able to secure that additional $1 million for the fund. And hopefully we put that to use and continue to show that it's not enough. And I understand the challenges and the pain that folks, particularly in your area, but folks down in Lake and Klamath counties are starting to have. We've got more wolves and more challenges, and the money goes shorter and shorter every year. So glad that we could at least replenish it this year.
Yeah, I think you captured that very well. We had really robust participation from membership on this particular issue, and for others too. Okay, Senate Bill 57, a little less controversial, but still it had to be plugged along in order to get there, and that was the brucellosis bill. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's one want to always giving credit to the members and the conversations that folks have and producers who show up and talk about challenges. And that bill isn't just a producer bill, but I think when you talk about the supply chain and people selling animals and some of the challenges of having requirements and who pays for them. But I also want to note Department of Agriculture. I think ODA really did a good job of trying to find a way where they could make people comfortable to say, we're not making a wholesale change here that certainly will have any impacts on animal health, but we are making a change that's going to take some new administrative rules and reflect. And I think there was a point in session where there were still folks within the industry around the state saying, hey, is this what we want to do? There were also folks saying, this is definitely what we want to do. Are we nervous about talking about vaccination and animal welfare at the same time? Because those can be hot topics outside of livestock in Salem, but pushing it through. And once again, I think the same as you mentioned with Senate Bill 479, getting a bill through and over to the governor's desk before the end of session when the politics really start getting dynamic is really a success, because there are many bills like Senate Bill 57 that have bipartisan support, committee leadership support. And if they don't get moved quickly through the process, they can end up landing on the cutting room floor just based on the rest of the chaos. So I think an opportunity and an example where OCA really is a chance to be a leading voice on issues that matter to our producers exclusively or predominantly, and making sure that the legislature is being responsive to the industry's needs.
Let's switch gears just a little bit, and we'll come back to something more positive here in a minute. But Senate Bill 85, that was a tough slog. And you want to talk about that particular bill?
Yeah, Senate Bill 85 was one of 5 different bills introduced that would either impact livestock broadly, or particularly CAFO permit holders, confined animal feeding operations. That's feedlots, dairies, chicken farms, pig farms, all the places that have enough animals, which Oregon has really probably the most robust CAFO water quality program in the country. The most draconian was a bill that would put an outright moratorium on any new permits or permit renewals, which would significantly suppress Oregon's food supply chain on the protein side. And then there was one that was an all-out limit on stock water for all exempt stock water, surface or groundwater, regardless of your type of operation. Those were probably the biggest. Those died before the deadline, but the industry really came together. I think there was a total of 6.5 hours of public testimony from advocates on all sides of this issue, mostly limited to about 90 seconds, which is really difficult. But the first hearing on that bill back in, I think, late March, led off with the cattle industry, the poultry industry, the dairy industry, and then a whole handful of legislators who came out to talk about what it meant for their district, whether it was Tillamook, whether it was Northeast Oregon, whether it was Willamette Valley. Ultimately, a bill passed. I think the upside of Senate Bill 85 is that this culminates really about 6 years since the Lost Valley issues of advocates wanting to go after animal agriculture. And really unfortunate, I think, that they were able to leverage one circumstance where the regulatory regime worked out and create some probably misinformation and scare tactics that drummed up a lot of folks in rural and urban areas. The final bill will implement some policies already existing at ODA around when you construct a new facility, consulting with ODA, showing that you have adequate access to water. But there will be more regulatory red tape for all permit holders as they have to submit where they get their current water, and gives OWRD some additional authority down the road that they could use. They're not required to. And then the most controversial piece was the stock water limit, which applies only to CAFOs. Now, I think intellectually combining what's already a water quality program with water quantity and one more state agency is certainly not appealing to producers. The silver lining on the cap on access to exempt groundwater for new permits and those within critical groundwater areas is that it will sunset in 2027, which hopefully gives us the ability to negotiate some better access to water for producers and feedlots so they can transfer water. You know, I use the example, if they want to transfer 4 acre-feet that's currently being used to grow alfalfa to 2 acre-feet for watering livestock, that's a win for the state because it's less water consumption, and it's a win for the livestock industry. But we'll have some leverage come 2.5 years when that comes up. And then really probably on the political sense, the record was very full with legislators saying that they've now heard loud and clear, whether that holds very long, that ag in Oregon has been overregulated, that producers are feeling the fatigue, that the tax burden, the new employment laws, ag overtime, additional targeting ag and rural communities has got to have a better filter. And I think it's our job as lobbyists and advocates and producers and ag organizations to continue to remind legislators of that, both Democrats and Republicans through the interim, that we've really got to stop the harm to our farms and ranches and give our producers a chance to catch up and thrive in really challenging markets. So complicated bill, but the production or the turnout and the engagement by producers, the constant engagement with emails. We had a really strong campaign called Families for Affordable Food that I think really was powerful with some suburban legislators, got us to hopefully a much better place than we would have been with an all-out moratorium on permits for feedlots and dairies and poultry farms and pork farms.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your work on that, Rocky. I know you worked really hard on it. The unfortunate thing is that, you know, for cattle producers here, if you've ever tried to place cattle in the fall, especially, our lots are brimming full. We're at capacity right now. And that expansion is much needed here, and we end up sending most of our cattle out of state to get fed.
And I think that
go ahead.
And I do think that was one thing that held at least the bill and created the leverage for some favorable negotiations was I do think there were legislators who were moved by consistent grassroots pressure, understanding that this isn't just let's make some, you know, animal rights activists happy in Portland, but that it really has some risks to what's currently a constrained supply chain, whether it's feedlots or the actual processing facilities. And that was a strength that I think, Todd, we said to legislators, you're literally trying to give money to processing, and at the same time, you're going to choke out the feedlots that feed out the processors. So we got to keep on that message.
Yeah, agreed. And so you mentioned it a little bit here, Rocky, but 5506, that was known as the Christmas tree bill, we did get a couple of wins in there. So $9 million for small processing, and that's going to be huge. Last year we got $2 million. I saw where 400 and some thousand was given to one facility, and what they were able to do with that money, it was phenomenal. So I am really excited about those grants going out the door and those guys getting those dollars to upgrade their facilities. So that was a big win. And the $1 million that you mentioned to wolf compensation with the current program is more than what we've gotten before. We'll be able to use all of it. We've had asked for over $500,000 in 1 year before, and we have a lot more wolves and a lot more problems. So it isn't enough, but again, much appreciated that we at least got that far. A couple of other things, well, more than a couple of other things. 498 that Senator Hansel brought forward, and what a big accomplishment that was, and how meaningful that's going to be to ranches and farms and other natural resource entities to be able to pass those down to the next generation. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. And you mentioned Senator Bill Hansel, and I think Republicans prioritizing this, and I think a number of Democrats, understanding the myriad of challenges that keeping working lands in production face, considering all the things we've already talked about. But it will actually increase the allowable exclusion for a state tax for passing down farms, ranches, and forest lands. The threshold goes up, so that means some more meaningful tax savings for, I will say, some of the smaller operations. Certainly, there would be more room for estate tax reform, and I suspect most of our members would like to see that, both at the state and the federal level. But one of the last bills passed in the session, and as I mentioned, very bipartisan, took a number of Democrats and Republicans, particularly on the Senate floor where we didn't have a full House at the end of session, and then of course the same on the House side, where some of the Democrats who've stood up for ag were there. But I think you're right. You captured the explanation, is at least that burden for the value of an estate that's taxable when it gets passed on to decedents is going to be meaningful for, I think, aside from, I say, the other challenges of staying in some of these businesses, for the next generation to be able to step up and want to take over these operations. And that's what we're talking about in Salem, constantly carrying the message that OCA and Farm Bureau and Nursery Association and others share, which is, how do you keep these lands in production? And that's certainly one of them. So great work on that. And not guaranteed. It passed, I think, in the last hour and a half of session. So great to see some of those things slip in under the deadline.
Yeah. There was a couple others that I'm going to touch on here. 3086, introduced by Representative Levy, that had to do with the Fish and Game Commission and the makeup thereof. You want to talk about that just a little?
Yeah, that was another one where I think you really see the power of grassroots advocacy, coalitions, and then of course legislators who take something up and really take it up as a personal cause within the legislature. Of course, with the new congressional district, we have a number of boards and commissions who are based on congressional districts, including the Fish and Wildlife Commission. And I think there were some legislators who thought, we'll just make this simple. We'll change them from a 5 or a 7 commissioners to 8 by adding that congressional district and one more seat. From I think the ag, natural resources, the tribal perspective, which was a big, tribes played a huge role in House Bill 3086, said, hey, listen, we've had a lot of trouble getting representation, not just based on people's political views, but just geographical participation. And the cattlemen joined in that effort. In fact, one of the hearings, I think you could see right in the hearing that the committee chair thought, well, this is just good governance. And Representative Anessa Hartman, one of the legislators who's got an indigenous background, took that up and said, I'm here to speak on behalf of the tribes. The cattlemen, the Farm Bureau, the Hunters Association all said, hey, we need to really find a way where we find people who are impacted by fish and wildlife decisions to have the opportunity to be appointed. And part of our counter was, it doesn't change the politics. The governor still gets to appoint and the Senate still has to approve these folks. Many of the rest of the boards and commissions went to the congressional model. I've said personally, and not afraid to say it here, that we all know that the congressional districts are part of a political process and determined for sending people to DC. That should have nothing to do with who serves on the Water Resources Commission or the Fish and Wildlife Commission. So also another bill that came down to the very end, as a bipartisan group of legislators came and said, we want to make sure that we've got regional representation. It'll be focused on river basins, and then there will be at-large positions, which will still allow more heavily weighted towards Portland if they appoint a West Side person in the Willamette Basin. So I think a fair result, at least a more pragmatic result than just rubber stamping the congressional redistricting that happened 2 years ago. So happy to see 3886 come through, and again, the very final hours of session this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that has the potential to be an impactful bill. When you look at CD2, that Cliff Lentz is over 71% of the geography of the state, and you get one representation for that. It's wildly unbalanced, especially when you look at the game populations that are in that 71%.
That's right. I mean, the wildlife of the state is held in trust by the state, and there's, producers end up paying a heavier cost for those conservation efforts. And we say that, I think, all the time as OCA, which is, a person who lives in Multnomah County doesn't necessarily pay the cost, but they get the benefits of our deer, our elk, our wolf, our cougar populations, whatever it is. And on the flip side, it's the people out in the rural areas who are paying for fish passage, who are paying for management choices that are made by ODF and W. The flip side too, and I know you and I've talked about this, is the congressional district, the Blumenauer district, I think is the first congressional district. It's very hard to find a name to put in from someone who has a background in animal agriculture or forestry, because that congressional district is entirely urban. So it all but guarantees that you have an exclusionary member on that commission. So I think the River Basin approach with some at-large is certainly a fair approach that hopefully has some more meaningful conversations when we talk about appointments coming up.
Yep, agreed. One last bill I want to talk about, and you know which one it is, near and dear to my heart, and I think it was to yours as well, and a lot of other people's, but 955, a bill that got sent initially to rules to die. We got it yarded out of there and got some hearings on it, got sent to Ways and Means. And it was nothing short of a miracle that it was the last bill to get heard in Ways and Means in this session. Do you want to talk about the bill a little bit, Rocky?
That's right. And I'll add Senate Bill 955, also the last bill before the resolution to adjourn that the House passed. Senate Bill 955 is a very small allocation, $300,000 to OSU Foundation, so the extension services can bolt into what's called the AgriStress Helpline, suicide and mental health crisis line dedicated specifically for agricultural employers and workers, offered multilingually. It's already set up and running. And I think, unfortunately, there's been a lot of loss in our rural communities for people who've died by suicide. I think the conversation that was generated by the bill, one, helps to destigmatize the fact that people in our industries are looking for help and looking for resources, but also had the opportunity to talk about that. And as you said, every legislator who heard about the bill within 2.5 minutes of getting the details, either from Dr. Allison Myers, the public health director at OSU, yourself, Todd, other members of agriculture, some of our partners in the Nurseries Association or forestry, immediately said they would be supportive. I think we ended up with 8 or 9 sponsors, and it passed. And so seeing that the legislature was willing to have a conversation about the heightened level of suicide in a state that already has high suicide levels, but the astounding numbers within rural communities and the agricultural community was really inspiring to get that done at the end. And we've got a lot more work to do to secure money for that, but really glad that we could get that bill. And you talk about under the wire, it literally was the last one before the gavel came down. So tribute to you, Todd, to Dr. Allison Myers. I know a number of people who got on the record to talk about their experiences with loss, and that's not an easy thing to do. So was really honored to be able to work on that bill on behalf of a really genuine community of folks, including behavioral health folks. The Mental Health Coalition jumped in, was supportive of the bill. So we had some allies that aren't traditionally involved in agricultural issues. And I think the conversation in and of itself will be of value, not just the bill and the program that gets set up.
Yeah, I agree. I think the continuing conversation and placing it into the hands of OSU Extension, and it's just the start of something that hopefully, we talk about normalizing wolves as a predator, and we can normalize mental health as something that we're going to have to deal with, and that we have a problem out here in rural America in agriculture, and I'm both dreading and looking forward to furthering the conversation. But Rocky, I'm going to wrap this up. Any closing thoughts on the session?
I'll just say it was a dynamic session, and I think we're going to watch for the next few months, political observers, to see there's still some loose ends and probably some fences to mend between a number of people, and that always is the case during session. But I think it offers an opportunity to follow up on these issues and continue to talk to those, whether it's mental health or managing wolves, or how our wildlife and water laws are set up. I think we can springboard and show people the work that we're willing to do with people across the aisle. So appreciate all the work that producers did over the last 7 months, and hopefully people have a safe and enjoyable long holiday weekend coming up.
Yep. Thank you, Rocky. And I am so appreciative of all the members that showed up, our allies that we depend on, and though we didn't get everything that we wanted, I doubt that we ever will, but we've made an impact, and we got a few things across the line, and we don't do that without an organization, without a lobbyist, without Tammy being there at the helm and organizing so much of it, and then members showing up and telling their stories. So it all works together, and it came together. We did some good, and I'm looking forward to maybe something more positive in the future.
Likewise. Thanks for, as always, for having me on and asking me some questions about Oregon politics. Always like to talk about it.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day, Rocky.
Thanks, Todd.